I was rinsing out Evelyn's blue mug when I noticed the teaspoon on the drain board was facing the wrong way. Not upside down, not dropped carelessly by a tired old man. Just turned so the bowl pointed toward the back door instead of the stove. And for one cold second I stood there with my hands under the water and had the strange immediate feeling that something in the kitchen had answered a question I had not yet thought to ask. The mug was still warm from the water I had poured through it, though no one had drunk from it but me in 4 months. Our kitchen looked the way it had looked most mornings for the last 39 years, which was part of the trouble. The butter dish sat beside the toaster on its crocheted mat. The oak table under the east window held the same shallow scratches from our son Daniel's 7th grade science fair volcano. The clock above the pantry door ran 6 minutes fast because Evelyn liked it that way, and I had never found a reason strong enough to change it. Outside the sink window, the box hedges were still clipped neat from the fall, the edges gone fuzzy with March trying and failing to become spring. The radiator beneath the sill gave off that faint, hot metal smell. Old houses keep even after you've replaced half their insides. Coffee dish soap, the yeasty crust of the last heel of rye bread, damp wool from my sweater thrown over the chair back. Everything ordinary, everything in place. Only the spoon was wrong. I turned it back the way she would have wanted. That was the first thing I did that day, which felt like obedience instead of grief. I am 71 years old, and I have lived in that house on Larkspur Avenue since Gerald Ford was president. It is a white clapboard place with green shutters that need painting every 6 or 7 years, whether you think they do or not. A narrow front hall that opens into a sitting room. No one sits in unless somebody is dead or visiting, and a staircase that creaks on the 3rd and 9th steps. No matter what carpenter tells you, he has fixed. Our bedroom is upstairs at the back. The room where my wife died is at the front above the sitting room where the winter light comes in harder and the street lamps shine through the lace after dusk. For 4 months after Evelyn's funeral, I had managed myself the way a school teacher manages a room after a fire drill, quietly, in sequence. No unnecessary displays. Blinds first east side, then west. Coffee grounds measured not guessed. The mail brought in before 10 if there was any. Her mug rinsed, though I did not use it for drinking because I could not bring myself to put my mouth where hers had been so often. I told people routine helped. What I meant was routine kept the house from looking at me too directly. The church grief luncheon had been Ruth Ann Bledsoe's idea. You can sit at the back and leave early, she had told me on the phone the day before. Nobody's making you testify, Tom. Ruth Ann had lived next door long enough to know which tone I could be moved by and which ones I could not. She was 66, widowed herself for almost a decade, and believed in casseroles, clean language, and telling the truth at least one sentence sooner than was comfortable. She had brought us chicken divan the week Evelyn came home after the fall. She had brought me split pea soup the week after the funeral and stood in the mudroom until she saw me eat 3 spoonfuls out of a bowl like I was a man recovering from surgery. I had no desire to sit in a church fellowship hall with paper name tags and congealing lasagna while strangers used the word journey about the worst winter of my life. But at 11:30, I put on my camel hair coat, folded my linen handkerchief into my inner pocket, and went, because grief, if you are not careful, will teach you to mistake refusal for character. The drive took 9 minutes. March sunlight lay thin over the neighborhood like something poured out and not enough. The church parking lot was half full. I remember noticing a silver Subaru in the second row with a dent over the rear wheel well and thinking with the false seriousness grief sometimes gives to useless detail that Evelyn would have wondered whether the driver backed into a post or someone hit her in the Kroger lot and never left a note. There were daffodils in mason jars on the fellowship hall tables. Somebody had laid out baked ham, scalloped potatoes, rolls, green beans with almonds that had gone soft in steam. The room smelled like coffee held too long on burners and floor polish and the sweet powder scent old women carry in their sweaters. People spoke in that careful register the bereaved inspire, as if any sentence might bruise you if it landed wrong. I took a plate mostly to avoid being spoken to. Ham potatoes, half a roll. Ruth Ann saw me from across the room and lifted her chin once in acknowledgement, not as if I were brave for showing up only punctual. I loved her a little for that. I had just set my plate at the end of a table near the folding partition when a woman turned from the coffee urn and looked straight at me with the startled recognition of someone who has stepped unexpectedly into work clothes after retirement. Mr. Hale. She was wearing a tan coat and a blue scarf looped once at the throat. Her hair was shorter than I remembered, more silver at the temples, and for a second I knew her and did not know from where until she touched 2 fingers unconsciously to the left side of her chest, right where a name badge would have been clipped if she'd been on shift. "Dana Mercer," she said. "I'm sorry. I should have said your nurse." Well, Evelyn's nurse. The room went quiet around her name inside my head, though I am sure it did not change at all outside it. Dana Mercer had been one of the home hospice nurses in the last 7 weeks. The calm one with the low voice and neat shoes who carried hand sanitizer in her pocket, and never called Evelyn honey or sweetie, which had made my wife like her at once. "Yes," I said. "Of course." "Dana." She looked stricken for half a beat, as if she had not meant to bring the dead into the room so abruptly. Then she smiled that professional sorrow-shaped smile I had seen her wear in our house, and asked how I was doing, which is a question no one once answered honestly, and no one stops asking. "I'm here," I said. It was enough. For most people, it always was. She nodded, then glanced toward the empty chair beside mine. "May I? Please." She sat with a paper cup of coffee and a slice of something with pineapple in gelatin that no one under 80 pretends to enjoy. For a minute or two, she spoke the way people do when the real thing is still waiting in the doorway. She said Evelyn had been a gracious patient. She said our house had stayed with her, especially the front room with the lace curtains. She said she often wondered how I was getting on. I thanked her because that is what one does when somebody praises the dead in front of you. Then she said very gently, "I'm glad you're out, Mr. Hale. I know you didn't come upstairs much toward the end. That can stay with a husband." I heard the sentence whole. I understood all the words in it. I still did not understand what she had said. I put my fork down carefully. "I beg your pardon." A flicker went through her face, then something quick and human and wrong. I only meant, I know those rooms can be hard. Sometimes spouses stay downstairs more. Sometimes it's just too much. I looked at her, then at the coffee in her cup, then back at her. There are moments when grief clears instead of clouds. Every surface in the room sharpened, the forks in their paper sleeves, the crack in the beige linoleum by the coat rack. Ruth Ann at the far table lifting a hand to tuck hair behind one ear. I could even smell the vinegar in the green beans. "I didn't stay downstairs," I said. Dana blinked. "I'm sorry," I said. "I didn't stay downstairs. I do not know whether my voice rose. It did not need to. Something in it must have changed, because she set her cup down without drinking. "Mr. Hale," she said quietly. "I may have spoken carelessly." "No," I said. "You spoke clearly. I'm the one having trouble." Color had left her face. Not much, just enough. She glanced once toward the doorway, as if there might be some proper procedural route for leaving a conversation too late. Then she leaned nearer and lowered her voice. "I thought during those last weeks I was under the impression the room was difficult for you, that you got upset upstairs, that sometimes you preferred updates in the kitchen." She paused. "I thought that was understood in the house." I stared at her. The fellowship hall did not fall silent. Somebody laughed at something near the coffee station. A chair scraped. Ice knocked against plastic in a cup, but all of it seemed to come from too far away. "Who told you that?" I asked. Her fingers tightened around the edge of the table. "I can't speak in broad strokes about everything from memory." "You were there. I'm asking what you remember." She swallowed. "I remember being told more than once that it was easier on your wife if things stayed calm. That you had already been up some days, that you found the room hard. She looked stricken now, not cautious. I'm sorry. I assumed you knew that's how we were charting it. There are certain humiliations that do not feel like heat. They feel cold, not shame first. Cold first. A draft where there should not be a draft. I thought of the staircase at home. The landing, the room above the sitting room, the blue hospital table by the window. I thought of winter evenings when Marianne stood in the kitchen with her sleeves rolled and a tray towel over one shoulder and told me her mother had finally settled. I said, "My wife asked for me." Donna's eyes flickered, and in that small involuntary movement I saw the answer before she gave it. "She did," she said after a beat. "Sometimes." The room shifted under me, half an inch. "What do you mean, sometimes?" Her mouth parted closed again. She was a nurse, not a prosecutor, not a priest. Whatever conscience had moved her into that sentence had not prepared her for standing inside it. I think she said carefully, "I think this may not be the place." "Then where is Mr. Hale?" "When my wife asked for me." "What were you told?" She looked at the tablecloth, then at me. Her eyes had gone bright in the way professional people hate. "I was told," she said, each word slow and plain, "that you had already been in and that another visit would tire her. Sometimes that you had had a hard time upstairs, sometimes that you preferred updates after she settled." She let out one breath through her nose. I thought that was the arrangement. For a second I could not feel my hands. Evelyn had fallen 3 days after Thanksgiving. Not a dramatic fall, no shattered glass, no slick patch of ice under heroic weather. She caught the edge of the upstairs hall runner with the rubber tip of her cane and went down hard against the molding. There was no broken hip, which felt like mercy at the time. There were, however, complications afterward, then weakness, then the quiet narrowing of her world that older bodies can do with terrifying speed when once they decide to give ground. By January, she was mostly in the front room upstairs because the bathroom there was closer and the hospice bed fit best under the east windows. By February, she was not coming downstairs at all. I had been in that room every day. Hadn't I? I heard my own voice as if from somewhere behind my left shoulder. There must be some mistake. "I hope there is," Dinah said. "Hope there is. Not hope there was." Ruth Ann was looking our way now. I could feel it without turning. Dana said I should not have said any of this in a public room. "No," I said. "You shouldn't have had reason to." She flinched just slightly. I was ashamed of it the moment it landed, but not enough to take it back. "I'm sorry," she said again. And this time the apology was no longer social. "I truly thought you knew how things had been communicated." Communicated. The word moved through me like dirty water through a pipe. I stood so suddenly my chair legs barked against the linoleum. 2 women near the coat rack looked over. "I have to go," I said. "Mr. Hale." I looked down at her. "If you want," she said carefully. "I would speak to you privately. Another time. To tell you what I can say and what I remember saying. I think you deserve that." Deserve. Another church word. Still I nodded because I did not trust myself to speak and because some part of me already knew I would take her up on it. Ruth Ann intercepted me in the hallway outside the fellowship room. "Tom." "I'm fine. That woman upset you." I said I'm fine. She took one look at my face and did not insult us both by arguing. Instead, she held the fellowship hall door wider so I could pass and said, "Call me before supper. Don't sit in that house all afternoon with whatever just happened." I almost told her then. Almost said Dana's name, the upstairs room, the charting, all of it. But I could not yet bear to hear it spoken by anyone else. Not until I had held it alone long enough to know whether it would break. The drive home took 11 minutes because I missed the light at Broad and had to sit behind a city bus with an ad for hearing aids across its back. The steering wheel felt hard and artificial under my hands. At one point, I realized I was clenching my jaw so tightly the hinge ached. By the time I turned onto Larkspur, I had built and discarded 6 explanations. Dana had confused me with another spouse. Some young staff nurse had charted carelessly, and Dana remembered the chart, not the house. Marianne had once said something offhand, and it had snowballed into hospice shorthand. I had in fact told them to spare Evelyn extra trips in and out because she was tired. I had not heard right. She had not meant what I heard. The house stood exactly where I had left it, which annoyed me. The front steps needed sweeping. A damp line of old snowmelt still darkened the north side of the walkway, where sunlight did not quite reach. I let myself in through the mudroom, hung my coat on the second peg from the end, and stood for a moment listening. Refrigerator hum. Heat clicking through pipes. Wind tapping bare branch against the west gutter. No upstairs sounds, of course. No tray. No footfall on the landing. No low voices. Just the house with its own old throat clearing. I went into the kitchen and put both palms flat on the counter. The laminate was cool. On the sill over the sink, Evelyn's little clay pot still held the dead stems of rosemary. She had insisted on trying to overwinter indoors every year, though the heat always defeated it by February. There is a kind of fear peculiar to old houses and old marriages, not fear of intruders. Fear that the life you trusted has already happened in 2 versions and you have only now been handed the wrong one. I made coffee, though I did not want it. I spilled grounds on the counter, which I never do. I wiped them with the side of my hand, then with a dish towel because Evelyn would have hated coffee dust worked into the laminate. When the coffee was done, I poured a cup and did not drink it. I stood at the sink looking at the backyard until the black surface of it went dull. Then, because there comes a moment when avoidance changes flavor and becomes cowardice, I set the cup down and turned toward the stairs. The front hall was cooler than the kitchen. It always was. Our staircase rises narrow and straight for 9 steps, turns at a landing with a tall window, then continues 8 more to the second floor. Evelyn used to stop at the turn in winter and rest one hand on the banister. Not because she needed to at first, but because she liked to look out at the maple in the side yard. When she was still strong enough, she would stand there in her navy wool scarf and say the tree looked like it was holding its breath for spring. The last winter before she got sick, she had stood on that landing window, throwing late afternoon light into the strands of her hair, and said almost idly, "Being needed and being trusted are not the same thing." Tom. I had been on the 3rd step below her with a grocery sack in one arm, and had looked up, smiling because I thought she was making one of her small philosophical remarks about the world, and I loved those in her. What brought that on? She had adjusted the scarf at her throat and looked back out the window. Nothing. Marianne was here this morning. She means well. I remember climbing the rest of the stairs, kissing her cheek and saying, "You and Marianne have always exhausted each other by loving the same people differently." She had laughed once, but not with much amusement. That's one way to put it. I think now of that moment often, though. Until the church hall, I had thought of it tenderly as the sort of married exchange that proves 2 people know each other's weather. Standing in the front hall with my hand on the banister, I felt that memory turn over in me and show another side. Not argument, not proof. Just another grain in the wood emerging where I had sanded it smooth. I climbed. The 3rd step creaked. The 9th. At the landing window, the light was thin and white. Dust had gathered in the corner of the sill. I could see where the curtain hem brushed the paint. The upstairs smelled different from downstairs. Less coffee, more heat. Dry plaster. Linen closet cedar if the hall door stood open. The faint medicinal ghost that had never quite left after hospice packed up the bed and supplies in February. Not strong. Just enough to tell you illness had once lived there and had not been fully evicted. Evelyn's room door was open 6 inches. That by itself was not strange. Doors in old houses settle into habits like people. Yet the sight of it open precisely that far made me stop. Marianne used to leave doors caught that way when she wanted to speak across a threshold without entering fully. Not open, not closed, ready to manage either direction. The upstairs landing was wider than most people remember because they only ever pass through it. Our second floor spreads around a central hall bedroom at the back, bath to the left linen closet, then the front room where Evelyn had stayed. During the hospice weeks, someone, Marianne, I supposed, had placed a straight-backed hall chair beside the front room door. Not inside the room. Outside it, against the wall, under the sconce. Next to the chair sat a small mahogany side table we ordinarily kept in the den under the lamp where Evelyn laid Christmas cards each December. On the table now was nothing but a square of crocheted doily, a pen, and a leather-bound book about the size of a church register. I stood looking at the arrangement with the deep unease of recognizing something you had seen 100 times without truly seeing it. The chair had a folded cream blanket over the back. The side table's surface gleamed faintly with lemon polish. The pen lay in the groove of the leather book, as if awaiting use. Everything was so neat that for half a beat my mind offered the word vigil. Then another word replaced it. Checkpoint. I did not like the word. It came anyway. I went first to Evelyn's room because there are still loyalties older than suspicion. The front room was larger than ours and colder in winter because of the 2 east-facing windows. We had once called it the guest room until children moved out and parents aged and names shifted according to need. During the last weeks, the hospice bed had stood angled near the window so Evelyn could see the street and the sycamore across from the Parker's place. After she died, Daniel helped have the rented equipment removed, and I put the room back in only the most minimal sense. The old walnut bedstead was there again, though we had not reassembled the high headboard. The braided rug lay at the bedside. Evelyn's reading chair remained by the windows with her navy scarf folded over the arm. On the bedside table stood her glasses, a lamp with a milky shade, and the small porcelain dish where she had once dropped earrings or the clasp of a necklace. There was no dust on the table, which meant Marianne had probably been in to clean recently, though she no longer came by every day. I stepped inside and felt the room rather around me. Grief changes with altitude in a house. Downstairs you can pretend to be functioning. Upstairs the air still knows who lay where. The bedspread was pale gray. Evelyn would have called it practical and unromantic. The lace curtains moved a little with a draft I could not feel lower down. On the dresser sat the framed photograph from Daniel's wedding in which she was laughing at something outside the frame, not toward the camera. Head tipped, mouth open, the way she did when laughter surprised her. I had not moved that photograph because I could not bear to choose a better one, and because no better one existed. I went to the chair and touched the scarf. The wool was soft, from use to navy, dark enough to look black in the corners. She had worn it the last winter. She could still make the stairs without stopping twice. After the fall, she asked for it one night because the room felt drafty. And Marianne said from somewhere behind me, "She doesn't need the heavy one, Dad." I brought the fleece throw. I had said all right. Standing there now with the scarf in my hand, I remembered Evelyn's face turning a little toward me from the bed. Not angry, not pleading, just tired and somehow further away because another voice had answered for comfort before she could. At the time I had thought nothing of it. Nothing. There is a violence in that word when memory applies it to the wrong place. I set the scarf down carefully and backed out of the room. The leather book on the side table waited where it was. I knew before I touched it that this was what Dana had meant. Hospice materials had passed through the house in so many forms. Clipboards, medication sheets, pamphlets, forms about skin care and comfort, and what to expect in the final 72 hours that one more bound volume would not have registered to me then. Even now it looked official, in the mild, well-meaning way of all medical paperwork. Brown leatherette cover, rounded corners, a little stitched seam, nothing dramatic. I put my fingers on the pen first. It was a black ballpoint with the hospice name printed in blue along the barrel. The cap was gone. A small fur of lint clung near the clicker. Then I opened the book. Inside the front cover, in neat typed letters, pasted beneath a plastic sleeve, were the words, "Family and Staff Visitor Record." Below that columns. Date, time in, time out. Name, relationship, notes. My heart began to beat hard enough that I could feel it in my lower throat. I turned the first page. January 11th. Dana Mercer, RN, 9:15. AM, notes. Pain assessment, family present. Marianne Condon. Daughter, 11:40. AM, Luke Condon. Grandson, 3:05 p.m. Chaplain Stephen Reese, 6:10 p.m. Then the next page. January the 12th. January 13th. Names, times, relationships, notes. Dinah, aide, social worker, Marianne. Luke. Daniel, once. Ruth Ann, once written in a rounder hand. Even a church friend from choir, whose casserole I remembered eating downstairs. I stood on the landing turning pages with the slow, deliberate care of a man handling evidence at a murder scene and trying not to call it that. January 18th. January 20th. January 22nd. There should have been my name everywhere. Not once. I turned faster. January 26th. February 1st. February 4th. Marianne, Luke, Dana, hospice aide, social worker, Daniel, Reverend Reese, no Thomas Hale. My fingertips had gone cold. I took my hand off the page and looked up, half expecting some human correction to enter the hall and explain itself. No one came. The house kept still. I put the book down, then immediately picked it up again because setting it down felt like consent. Maybe there had been another log. Maybe I had signed a clipboard in the room instead. Maybe spouses weren't required to sign. Maybe. The mind is a remarkable employee of its own fear. I turned back to the first page and read the printed header more carefully. Family and staff visitor record. Family and staff. There was no exemption printed for husbands. No line that said primary spouse assumed present. No asterisk. Just columns, blank and filled according to who came and went. On January the 29th, in the notes column under Dana's name, someone had written in compact nursing script husband, updated downstairs. I stopped breathing for a moment. Updated downstairs. On February the 3rd, spouse resting daughter at bedside. On February 7th, family requests low stimulation this evening. The ink on those lines had browned a little with time. Ordinary pen oxidation, ordinary old ink. Yet the words seemed fresh enough to stain. I looked over my shoulder into Evelyn's room. The windows gave onto the street. The bed. The chair, the scarf, her glasses. I said out loud, though barely, no. There is something obscene about using denial in an empty hall. It asks the house to lie with you. I flipped pages again, hunting for my own name now, not hopefully, but with the rising fury of someone checking an old-school roster for proof he had existed in 5th grade. Thomas? Tom. Mr. Hale. Husband. Nothing. Page after page, a winter of entries, and no husband. And underneath the shock, or inside it, another recognition slowly forming more dangerous because it was not written in ink. I remembered the chair. Not as furniture moved during illness, as a place Marianne sat with a tray on her lap while telling me Evelyn was finally asleep. I remembered the side table, not as convenient storage, as the surface where she set mugs and notes while standing between the staircase and the room. I remembered the angle of the front room door, not open in welcome, not closed in secrecy, caught just enough to control the view. Memory did not arrive in one bright flood. It came in separate humiliations. Me in the kitchen hearing muffled voices upstairs and assuming care was occurring. Marianne descending the staircase with a wash basin and telling me Mom had had a hard hour, but was settled now. Luke carrying a tray up, then back down, half an hour later, saying Grandma drank some broth. A nurse in the front hall saying she would just pop upstairs, and Marianne answering from the landing. She finally drifted off, but yes, of course. I had been there. I had not been absent from the house. That was what made the pages so terrifying. They described a winter in which my wife died under my roof, and I existed mainly at the base of the stairs receiving translations. I closed the book and immediately opened it again to the back pages, irrationally certain the end might restore me if the middle had not. It did not. My name was nowhere. The hall chair stood beside me with its folded blanket like witness clothes left at a trial. The house gave a soft click somewhere deep in the pipes. And standing there with the visitor log open in both hands, I understood the first true thing I had understood all day. Whatever happened in the last weeks of Evelyn's life had not merely been painful, it had been arranged. I looked down at the page in front of me at line after line of winter dates and neat handwriting and saw that the record of my wife's dying contained almost everyone who mattered to her except the man who had been married to her for 42 years. Except me. I do not know how long I stood there on the landing with the log open in my hands. Long enough for the baseboard heat to click on and breathe its dry warmth around my ankles. Long enough for a car to pass outside and throw a moving rectangle of light across Evelyn's bedroom wall. Long enough for the leather cover to warm under my fingers until it no longer felt like an object from a medical office and began to feel like something that had belonged to the house all along, quietly waiting for the day I would have the courage or the misfortune to read it correctly. When I could move again, I took the book downstairs. That felt wrong immediately. Not because it belonged upstairs in any official sense, but because carrying it through the house made me feel as if I were transporting a piece of the winter into spring rooms that had not agreed to receive it. I held it flat against my palm thumb pressed across the cover and went down slowly, watching my footing in a way I had not done since Evelyn fell. Third step, turn. Ninth. The house gave one of its old creaks under me, familiar enough to have been part of our marriage. In the kitchen, I set the log on the counter beside the toaster and just looked at it. Afternoon light had moved west. The sink window no longer shone directly. Instead, it held the blurred reflection of the room itself. Table chairs, my own dark shape near the counter. The kitchen smelled of coffee gone stale in the pot and the damp wool of my sweater where the sleeves had gotten wet at the sink. On the rack by the stove, Evelyn's dish towels hung folded the way she used to leave them, stripes all facing out because she claimed mixed directions made a room look tired. I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator where we kept odds and ends that never found a truer home. Rubber bands, pens, old coupons, a tiny screwdriver, and the hospice folder I had shoved there in February because I had not yet been able to decide whether it belonged with bills or with the dead. The folder was pale green cardstock, softened at the corners from handling. On the front in blue ink, someone had written, "Hail Evelyn G." The sight of her name in block letters made my throat tighten the way it still sometimes did when I heard it unexpectedly in the world, as if the name were a door someone had opened too fast. I carried the folder and the log to the kitchen table. There is an indignity in turning your wife's dying into paperwork. There is also. I was beginning to understand an equal indignity in refusing the paperwork because you are sentimental about the dying. I sat down in the chair nearest the window. The chair I had sat in for most of the winter, while Marianne stood at the counter and told me what was happening upstairs, and I began laying the pages out. The notes were mostly what you would expect. Medication changes, pain levels, skin checks, appetite. Bowel movements written in the clinical language that saves strangers from embarrassment and leaves husbands with the vulgarity of facts. Yet threaded through the pages, now visible as if under a dye I had only just been given, were phrases that made my stomach knot. Family prefers quiet after 6. Husband updated downstairs. Spouse resting. Patient settled after family discussion. Daughter requests low stimulation tonight. I read the words twice, then a third time, because once is not enough when language changes rank in front of you. It was all so reasonable. That was the first monstrous thing about it. Nothing screamed, nothing announced itself as cruelty. The pages described a house in which tired people made gentle decisions in the best interest of a dying woman. They described exactly the sort of household I had believed myself to be living in. And yet, The log lay open beside the notes like a witness who had not yet realized how much he knew. January 29th. Husband updated downstairs. I turned to January 29th in the visitor log. Dana at 9:10, Marianne at 10:35, Luke at 2:12, Chaplin at 5:40. No husband. I sat back in my chair and stared across the kitchen. The old maple outside the window lifted its bare branches against a white sky. A pair of starlings dropped into the hedge and vanished as if swallowed by it. The refrigerator motor kicked in with a hum I had heard 10,000 times and had never once resented until that moment when its ordinary noise seemed almost offensive in the face of what the table held. I pulled a yellow legal pad from the sideboard drawer and wrote January 29th at the top of the page. Under it, I wrote in my own hand exactly what the hospice note said. Then I wrote, "What actually happened?" The question sat there like something asked at the wrong trial. I closed my eyes and tried to remember the date not as a calendar entry, but as weather smell body. January 29th. Had there been sleet? Was that the week Ruth Ann brought beef stew? Had Daniel called that Sunday or the next? Memory does not return because you order it to. It returns because something in the room gives it permission. What gave it permission then was the sugar bowl. It sat in the center of the table, white china with a blue line around the lip and a chip at the base from the Thanksgiving. Ben Talbot dropped it in 1998. Marianne had set it there 3 nights out of 5 during the winter because she took tea in the evenings and assumed everybody else should too. I looked at that sugar bowl and remembered with such force I almost put my hand on the table to steady myself one specific January night when she had stood at this very counter spooning sugar into a mug and telling me Evelyn was finally resting. Not January 29th, maybe. Or maybe exactly then. What mattered was not the date first. What mattered was the shape of it. Marianne in a grey cardigan, sleeves pushed to the elbows, steam from the kettle clouding the window over the sink, her voice low, practical, faintly tender in that way she had when she wanted tenderness to sound like competence. "She asked for you earlier, Dad, but she's worn herself out now. Let her settle. I'll sit with her a while." I had believed that sentence to be kind. Sitting in the kitchen with the notes spread before me, I understood that sentence had 2 possible meanings, and that for months I had granted Marianne the better one automatically. I rose so abruptly the chair legs scraped the floor. The movement startled me. I am not a man given to dramatics in empty rooms, and the house seemed to notice the break in my usual manners as much as I did. The clock over the pantry door ticked once, loud as a finger tap. Marianne still had a key. She had kept one since the children were teenagers, and after Evelyn's illness I had never found a decent moment to ask for it back. She came most weekdays around 4 or 5, sometimes with groceries, sometimes with mail from the box. If she had taken it in for me, sometimes with nothing except the brisk purposefulness of a person who had made herself part of the house's circulation. I looked at the clock. 4:15. I gathered the papers into 2 stacks, then stopped. Hiding them felt childish. Leaving them spread out felt like challenge. In the end, I did neither. I closed the hospice folder, set the visitor log on top of it, and moved both to the sideboard beneath the framed sampler Evelyn's mother had stitched in 1949. A place visible enough not to be secretive, deliberate enough not to be accidental. Then I stood at the sink and waited. She arrived at 4:18. I knew it was Marianne before the bell because her car door shut with the clipped finality of someone who has always parked as if time were following too closely behind. Then the back path, the mudroom latch, the small thud of grocery bags set against the wall before she came into the kitchen carrying a carton of eggs under one arm and a paper sack in the other. "Hey," she said. "I picked up rye at Schneider's before they sold out, and you were almost out of half and half, so—" She stopped. Not because she saw the papers. She had not turned that far. She stopped because she saw me standing still at the sink with my hands braced on the counter, not moving toward her, not reaching for the groceries, not doing any of the little things that make a house feel continuous. "What happened?" she said. There it was. Immediate management. Not hello first, not how are you. What happened? Marianne was 47, though there are moments when daughters revert so precisely to the ages at which they first learned power that chronology becomes almost decorative. She had Evelyn's dark hair, though worn shorter and flatter, and none of her mother's softness around the eyes. Her face could be lovely when she forgot to direct it. Most of the time, it looked composed in advance. She had on a tan trench coat over navy slacks, her silver watch on the left wrist, and the small pearl studs she wore when she wanted to look like she had not simply come from work, but had remained presentable through it. I went to the church luncheon, I said. She set the eggs down with care. That was today. Yes, how was it Evelyn's nurse was there? A stillness passed through her then so slight another man might have missed it. Not fear, something smaller and more trained than fear. Recalculation. Dana, she said. I didn't know she went to that. She asked me why I never visited your mother upstairs. Marianne looked at me, then at the sink, then back at me. It is a terrible thing when your child's face becomes a document you are learning to read against your will. What did she mean by that? Marianne asked. I laughed once. I could not help it, not because anything was funny, because it was the exact right sentence if one wished to place oneself on the far side of knowledge without making the movement visible. That, I said, is exactly what I asked her. She slipped off her coat and hung it on the chair back instead of the peg by the door. A mistake. Marianne was fastidious with placement. When she began placing objects carelessly, it meant her attention had gone somewhere harder than the room. Dad, she said gently, I'm sure she meant you didn't go up as much toward the end. You had a hard time with the room. No. Tom, don't do that. She stopped. I had not called her Marianne. I had said, don't do that like a husband to a wife, not a father to a daughter, and I think both of us heard the misfire. Do what she asked. Answer with the version that makes me feel difficult before we've established whether there is anything to answer at all. A pulse moved in her jaw. Small, quick. I'm not trying to make you feel difficult. No. What are you trying to make me feel? She bent to lift the bread from the bag, then set it down again without opening the twist tie. I think you're upset because somebody spoke loosely about a very bad time. I looked at her. Then I crossed to the sideboard, picked up the visitor log, and set it on the table between us. The leather cover made a dull, flat sound against the wood. Marianne's eyes moved to it and stayed there half a second too long. What is that? She asked. Again, very nearly perfect. You tell me. She came closer, not quickly. Marianne never moved quickly when slowness might imply reason. She put 2 fingertips on the cover as if the object were no more meaningful than a church register left in the wrong room. Then she opened it. Her face did not collapse. That would have been easier. It simply smoothed itself 1 degree flatter. Oh, she said, the hospice sign-in book. Yes. I forgot they left that. Did you? She let that pass. Dad, this doesn't mean what you think it means. What do I think it means that you were somehow kept from Mom? She closed the book halfway, not shut. You weren't. You were here. You came and went. Nobody was counting every time you stood in the doorway. I was counted enough downstairs. That's not fair. Isn't it? Her hand remained on the cover. I noticed then that she was smoothing the edge of the leather with her thumb the way she used to smooth napkins before holiday dinners when she was angry and needed the table to absorb it. You were overwhelmed, she said quietly. Sometimes you asked me to handle things. What things? Updates, medications, talking to the nurses when it got to be too much. I thought of all the times in January and February I had let Marianne answer a practical question because my wife was upstairs failing by inches, and I did not know how to inhabit that without help. A dosage, a bowel issue, whether the morphine had increased. Yes, I had let her handle things, practical things. Bodies are full of logistics when they start to close down, but not this, not me. I never told anyone I didn't want to see my wife, I said. No one said that. Dana did not invent it. Marianne looked away, then toward the window over the sink where dusk had begun to blue the glass. Dana saw pieces of things. Nurses always do. They come in, they chart, they leave. They don't live in a family. No, I said. They only record what the family tells them. She met my eyes again. You want me to say I was trying to protect Mom from too much stimulation? Fine. I was. She got tired. She got agitated. Sometimes when you went up, she would try to rally for you, and then she'd crash afterward. She asked for me. The sentence hung between us. Marianne's face did not change much, only enough. Who told you that? The question landed before she could stop it. Not, what do you mean? Not when. Who told you that? It was the first true crack in her voice I had heard all afternoon. She did ask for me, didn't she? Sometimes she asked for all kinds of things, Marianne said. She was on medication. She would ask for people and then forget they'd been there. She would ask for the old yellow quilt from Cedarville and then insist it was in the linen closet when we both knew it had been donated years ago. She asked for her father one night. It doesn't mean every request could be indulged exactly as spoken. Indulged. The word moved through me like a blade drawn slowly out of cloth. I said, "Did you ever tell a nurse I preferred updates downstairs?" She folded her arms. I may have said it was easier on you some evenings if they caught you here. Which was true. Did I tell you to say that? You didn't have to. There are answers one never quite recovers from, not because of their content alone, but because of the ease with which they are given. She had said it almost kindly, as if I were asking why she had shut a window in rain. You didn't have to, I repeated. Dad, come on. No. Stay there. She had taken one step around the table toward me, and I realized with a fresh, small horror how much of the winter had consisted of Marianne moving physically nearer at the exact moment language began to harden, as if proximity itself were a solvent. She stopped. I looked at her and saw superimposed for an instant Evelyn on the landing last winter, with her scarf at her throat saying, "Being needed and being trusted are not the same thing, Tom." At the time, I had thought she was being unfair. Sitting there now with Marianne in my kitchen, I felt the old memory change shape so completely it was almost unbearable. My wife had not been making a philosophical remark. She had been handing me a key I was too comfortable to use. Marianne said softer now, "You are making this uglier than it was." The line might have worked on me 2 days earlier. 4 months earlier, it would almost certainly have worked. It was, after all, exactly the sort of sentence I had used on myself for much of my adult life. Don't make it uglier than it is. Don't exaggerate. Don't turn friction into fracture. Instead, I heard in it another sentence buried but intact. Let me keep defining the terms. What exactly was it I asked? She hesitated. That was new too. Marianne did not hesitate over ordinary truth, only over truth that needed arranging. It was a hard time, she said finally. For everybody. That is whether. I'm asking for facts. Mom was dying. Yes. She was tired, confused on medication and pain, and some evenings she did better with shorter visits. Did she tell you that Marianne gave me a look almost maternal in its patience, and I felt a heat rise in my chest I had not allowed myself in years? You know how Mom was, she said. She didn't always know what she needed in the moment. No. No, that was the lie now in its most polished form, because Evelyn had known exactly what she needed in most moments of our married life. She knew when the car sounded wrong, 2 days before the muffler split on the freeway. She knew our son Daniel was miserable in 8th grade 6 months before he admitted a boy had been tormenting him in shop class. She knew my blood pressure medicine was making me light-headed before I did, because she noticed me bracing a hand on counters I did not remember touching. She had known years ago that Marianne's way of helping often contained a claim within it. Not rudeness, not malice. Claim. And what I had loved in Evelyn for 42 years, her steadiness, her order, her refusal to magnify nonsense, I had also at certain terrible moments used against her by assuming that anything she raised which threatened family peace must be the rare case where she was misreading. "You say she didn't know what she needed," I said. "I wonder if that made life easier for everyone." Marianne stared at me, and for the first time that day, something unsoftened moved into her expression. "I slept on your sofa for 3 weeks," she said. "I changed dressings. I cleaned your mother when she couldn't do it herself. I kept this house from sliding into panic. If you want to sit there in March and decide a nurse's offhand comment means I did something monstrous, I don't know what to do with that." Neither did I. That more than anything was what made the room dangerous. She was not entirely wrong. She had done those things. She had slept on the sofa. She had managed dressings, meals, medicines, schedules, the 1,000 indignities of failing flesh that love alone does not know how to organize. I had watched her do them. I had been grateful. Gratitude is one of the easiest emotional currencies to counterfeit because it spends so readily. "I didn't say monstrous," I said. "You didn't have to." Her voice had risen by perhaps 3 decibels, no more, but in our kitchen that counted as shouting. She caught it immediately and lowered herself back into composure. "I think you're tired," she said. "And I think this conversation should happen when Daniel's here if you're really determined to turn hospice records into a family trial." The use of Daniel's name was not accidental. Daniel was our son, a physical therapist at a rehab hospital in Newark, practical to the point of irritation, and the only member of the family besides Evelyn who could reliably slow Marianne's momentum. Invoking him now was a way of moving the conversation out of my control and into a broader terrain where reason could be voted on. "That won't be necessary," I said. She picked up her coat from the chair back. "Fine." The single word did not mean fine. It meant retreat for now. At the mudroom door, she stopped and half-turned. "You were there, Dad," she said. "Even when you weren't upstairs, you were there. Mom knew that." Then she left. The back door shut. Her car started. Gravel crackled under the tires as she backed into the alley and pulled away. I remained standing in the kitchen, one hand flat on the table until the sound of the engine disappeared. "You were there, even when you weren't upstairs." It was a cruel sentence, and not only because it was clever. It was cruel because some old frightened piece of me wanted it to be true. Wanted badly enough to blur the edges of everything else. I sat down and opened the log again. There are moments when certainty is impossible, but revision is not. I could not yet say what precisely Marianne had done or how many times or under what justifications. But I could say this: she had not answered me once without editing the ground beneath the question. The kitchen grew darker around me. I switched on the lamp over the sink and the small lamp on the sideboard, leaving the overhead off. Evelyn hated ceiling lights after dusk. "They make a house feel interrogated," she used to say. I almost laughed at the memory, and did not. At 6 o'clock the phone rang. I let it ring twice before picking up, expecting perhaps Ruth Ann checking whether I had followed her instructions and not let the house eat me whole. It was Dana. "Mr. Hale." "It's Tom." A pause. "Tom, I hope I'm not calling too late." "No." I could hear something in the background on her end, silverware maybe, or a television turned low in another room. Domestic life. The knowledge that other people moved through their evenings while mine had gone to ground, somewhere between January and now, felt oddly obscene. "I thought about leaving this until tomorrow," she said. "But after what happened today, I didn't feel right waiting." I sat down again at the table and looked at the notes. "All right, I need to be careful," she said. "There are things I remember, and there are things I can document, and I don't want to overstate one for the other." "I understand. I'm not sure you do." Her voice was kind, but there was steel in it now. Professional steel. You're hurt, and when people are hurt, they reach too fast for the shape that makes the pain make sense. I don't want to become part of that. So I'm going to tell you only what I know. The sentence steadied me more than sympathy would have. Evelyn used to say the best kind people were rarely the warmest first. Go on, I said. I reviewed some personal notes this afternoon, Dinah said. Not chart copies, just dates I keep when a case troubles me afterward. I shouldn't have said that last part, but it's true. Your wife's case troubled me. My fingers tightened around the phone. Why? Because the communication pattern in the house was unusual. Not impossible, not automatically wrong, just unusual. Most spouses at home hospice either stay close to the room or stay away visibly. Your situation was narrated. The word landed so exactly I had to close my eyes. Narrated, I repeated. Yes. I said nothing. She continued. Several times when I arrived, your daughter or grandson told me you had just been in with your wife, or that you'd had a difficult time upstairs, or that it was better if updates came to you later in the kitchen. I accepted those explanations because there are many kinds of grief, and because when I did see you, you were often downstairs and visibly strained. I thought of myself at this table in January, elbows on my knees, staring at cooling tea while footsteps passed overhead. Strained, yes. Strained and trusting. The second part hurt more. I have one specific note to this effect on February 3rd, she said. And there was a voicemail. The room seemed to draw inward. A voicemail from who? Your daughter. She called before a scheduled visit. She said your wife had had a hard night, that you were exhausted, that if I needed family information, I should check with her first because you were taking things very hard. Dana paused. That alone would not mean much. Families often filter logistics, but in context, it does. Yes. I looked at the sink window, black now, but for the reflection of the kitchen lamp and my own head bent toward the phone. Do you still have it? I asked. The voicemail. Yes. Another pause. I do. My mouth went dry. Why? Because after your wife died, I kept thinking about a moment in the room that I had put aside too quickly. She exhaled softly. I'm not proud of that. What moment? There was the faintest rustle on the line, as if she had shifted in her chair or stood up from it. One afternoon, your wife asked quite clearly whether you were coming up. Your daughter said you had already been in, and that another visit would upset her. Your wife looked at me and asked if that was true. I thought Dana stopped and corrected herself. No, that's not accurate. I didn't think. I made a judgment under pressure and let the moment move on. I said, I'm sure he's nearby, Mrs. Hale. The room fell so quiet I could hear the electric tick in the cord of the kitchen clock. I swallowed once and said, and was I nearby? Yes. Downstairs? Yes. The word was very small. It changed the size of everything in the house. I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes. Not hard, just enough to stop them from seeing the table and the notes and the ugly calm of the kitchen around me. My wife looked at you, I said. Yes. And asked whether that was true. Yes. I let my hand fall. Dana. Yes. When she asked for me, how often did that happen? Silence, not avoidance. Care. That frightened me more than a quick answer would have. Tom, she said finally, and her voice was different now, lower, no longer arranged for a church hall or a polite follow-up call. I can't give you a number I can defend. Pain medication changes memory at the edges. Time compresses. But I can tell you this. I waited. And in the waiting, another memory came up from the dark. Late January. Snow at the windows. I had stood in this kitchen while Marianne sliced toast into narrow strips because Mom could manage those better. And from upstairs I heard a sound, not a word. Not clearly, just the rise of a voice. I remember looking toward the hall. Marianne did not. She kept cutting toast and said without turning, she gets restless when she knows people are milling around. At the time I had thought, of course. It made sense. Dying houses are full of whispered explanations that attach themselves to whatever noise hurts most. Now, standing in the same kitchen with the phone to my ear, I felt the old scene split open like damp wood. Tom, Dana said, "I'm here." Then she said it. Plainly, without apology, without padding, the way truth is best said when it is already too late to save anyone from it. "Your wife did ask for you." I could not speak. The words did not feel like information. They felt like impact. Not because I had never imagined Evelyn asking for me. That was what I had always believed under every gentled update and every smoothed evening. Of course she wanted me. Of course I wanted her. That had been the last clean thing in the story. What collapsed then was not only the clean thing, it was the arrangement beneath it. Because if she asked for me, and if I was downstairs, and if the record above my kitchen table said husband, updated downstairs, while the log said no husband upstairs, then some person in my own house had stood between my wife's request and my body and translated one into the absence of the other. I heard myself say, "Though I do not know from what depth it came, Jesus." Dana did not answer. Good nurses know when religion is not about doctrine, but damage. I put the phone on speaker and lowered it to the table because my hand had begun to shake. The room swam once, then steadied. "She asked for me." I said again, as if repetition might make the sentence less lethal. "Yes." "And you were told I'd already been there." "Yes." "And you charted that." "I charted what I was told." "The family arrangement was," Dinah said, and there was no self-protection left in her voice. Now only sorrow and a professional's horror at having helped write down a lie because it looked organized. "I am sorry." I looked across the kitchen toward the hall, toward the staircase just beyond it, invisible from the table but present in the house like a second spine. Every evening of the winter rose before me in altered light. Tea cooling at this table, Marianne at the counter with a dish towel over her shoulder, Luke carrying trays, my own coat folded over the chair back while I told myself I would go up in a little while after things settled. After she settled. After the nurse left. After the medication, after the agitation. After. A man can ruin a marriage in many flamboyant ways. I had done it perhaps in a quieter one by letting after become a moral principle. On the table beside the phone, the visitor log lay open to February 3rd. Under the lamp, its ruled lines looked almost pretty. I hated that. Dana said something else then, but it came to me through the roaring in my ears, and I had to ask her to repeat it. "I said there may be someone else you should speak to at hospice," she said. "The social worker assigned to your wife's case. Meredith Sloan. She handled family communication concerns. If what you're telling me is accurate, she may be able to confirm what should or should not have happened." "What should or should not have happened," I repeated. "Yes." "Dinah." "Yes." "Did Meredith know?" Another pause. I don't know what she knew in full. I do know I made a note once to discuss whether the communication flow in the house was too centralized through your daughter. I don't know if that conversation ever formally occurred. I can check. Too centralized through your daughter. I thought of the kitchen counter, the side table, the hall chair, the tray towel, the lowered voice, the little silver watch catching light as Marianne glanced at the time and told me what my wife could bear. A house is not transformed into deceptive territory by one revelation alone. It is transformed when ordinary objects begin lining up on the side of the revelation as if they had been waiting for it to arrive. I stared at the refrigerator, at the magnets, at the grocery list still stuck there in Evelyn's hand from November celery, stamps batteries, pears faded now under months of steam and light. "Would you like me to call Meredith first?" Dana asked. I drew a breath that scraped going in. "No, I'll call, all right." And Dana, "Yes. Thank you for telling me." The silence that followed was not comfortable, but it was honest. When I hung up, the house seemed to listen. I stayed at the table a long while after that, not reading, not writing, only sitting in the kind of stillness that comes after impact when the body has not yet decided whether it is wounded furious or both. Outside, the first true dark of evening settled across the yard. The hedge became one low black shape. A porch light came on next door at Ruth Ann's, then another across the street. Somewhere far off, a siren moved through town and away again. In the kitchen, the clock over the pantry door kept its foolish 6-minute lead as if time was still a matter we could influence by preference. Finally, I rose and went to the foot of the stairs. I did not climb them. Not then. I stood with one hand on the banister and looked up into the dimness where the landing lay beyond sight, and I understood that I had crossed a line all the same. Until Dana's call, some old remnant of my mind had still been bargaining a misunderstanding, an overburdened daughter, a nurse remembering badly a record, not meant literally, grief, distorting sequence. Painful explanations, but survivable ones. Explanations that left the family's moral shape essentially intact. Dana's plain sentence had stripped those away. Your wife did ask for you. The old belief did not weaken after that. It collapsed. And in the cold quiet at the bottom of my own staircase, I knew with a certainty so sharp it felt physical that someone inside this house had heard my wife ask for me, and decided in my name or in hers, or in the holy language of keeping things calm, that I should remain where I was. Someone inside this house had heard my wife ask for me and decided in my or in hers, or in the holy language of keeping things calm, that I should remain where I was. I slept badly, though that is too mild a phrase for what happened in the bedroom that night. Sleep implies surrender. What I did was lie under the old quilt with my hands folded over my ribs and drift in and out of a series of hard, thin dozes that never once became rest. Every time I came half awake, I had to relearn the same brutal geometry: bedroom at the back of the house, front room upstairs where Evelyn died, staircase between them, kitchen below where I had sat receiving words in place of my wife. Around 2:30, I got up and walked barefoot to the bathroom because there are humiliations the body refuses to postpone for grief. The hall floorboards were cold underfoot. On the way back, I stopped at the head of the stairs and looked down into the front hall. Moonlight from the landing window had laid itself in a pale rectangle over the banister. The house seemed both utterly familiar and quietly rearranged, as if someone had taken the floor plan I had lived inside for decades and shifted its meaning 1 inch to the left. At 6, I gave up on bed entirely. I shaved, I dressed, I made coffee. The spoon was right way round on the drain board this time, which should have comforted me, and did not. I opened the blinds east to west. I fed the dead rosemary stem a little water out of habit and felt foolish for doing it. Then I carried the visitor log, the hospice folder, and a yellow legal pad into the dining room instead of the kitchen. That was the first deliberate thing I did. The dining room sat between the kitchen and the front hall, separated by a wide cased opening and a set of old pocket doors we almost never used. It was the room where we had hosted Easter dinners. Graduations, Evelyn's 60th birthday, and one memorably disastrous Thanksgiving in 1989, when my brother-in-law Earl brought a woman 20 years younger than himself, and no one admitted until pie that they thought she was his dental hygienist. It held the better table, the straight-backed chairs, the sideboard with the silver we used twice a year, and windows onto the side yard that let in a clear, almost judicial light by morning. I had not worked at that table since retirement. The room had always felt too formal for anything but company and ritual. That morning I wanted formality. I wanted a surface that did not smell like tea and excuses. I laid everything out and began. Dates first. January 11th to February 22nd. Names. Times in, times out. Matching hospice notes to visitor log, entries notating where phrases repeated underlining each time family preference appeared in a sentence where Evelyn should have been the subject. The work steadied me in a way grief had not. I was a history teacher for 38 years. Before that, I wrote my graduate thesis on casualty reports and morale language in letters home from the Civil War. There are men who become dangerous because they can throw punches late in life. There are others, quieter and less cinematic, who become dangerous because they know how to organize evidence. By 8:30, I had 3 pages of notes and a headache beginning behind my left eye. At 9:15, the phone rang. Daniel. I looked at the number, considered letting it go to voicemail, then answered because one does not have many sons and few are still worth trusting under pressure. "Morning," he said. He always sounded as if he were already in a hallway somewhere, even on his days off. "You all right now?" A pause. Ruth Ann called. Of course she had. "What did she tell you, that your nurse said something at church that upset you, and that if I had any sense I'd call before you spent another day alone with it?" I almost smiled. Ruth Ann, in a sentence. Daniel waited. He was 44, 8 years younger than Marianne, broader through the shoulders than I had ever been with Evelyn's mouth, and my tendency to go quiet when it mattered. He worked at a rehab hospital outside Newark and had the practical calm of men who spend their days coaxing damaged bodies into cooperating with the world again. People trusted Daniel because he rarely spoke before he had something useful to say. Marianne hated that about him because it meant she could not get ahead of his conclusions by sheer volume of language. "I need you to come over," I said. "What happened? I'll tell you when you get here." He was silent, just long enough that I knew he had heard the tone rather than the words. "I'll be there by 11, he said. "Drive carefully. You too." "I'm not driving." "Then sit down until I get there." When I hung up, I went to the front hall and looked up the stairs again. There is a point at which a house begins to feel less like shelter than a witness waiting to be questioned correctly. I could not stay at the dining room table and let paper do all the work. The records had given me sequence. The house would have to give me mechanism. I climbed slowly, notebook in hand. The upstairs landing in morning light looked almost harmless. That was what made it so hateful. The sconce above the hall chair was off. Pale sun came through the front room curtains and through a faint bar across the rug. Dust motes moved lazily in the air. The chair stood where it had stood the day before, cream blanket folded over the back with Marianne's fussy precision. The side table, polished and useless looking, held nothing now because I had removed the log. Without the book, it looked almost ridiculous. A little mahogany platform for waiting politely outside a sick room. I stood exactly where a person coming up the stairs would stand and looked. From there, you could not see the whole room. Just the edge of the bed if the door was left partway open, the lower half of the window, and the top corner of the dresser mirror. A person on the chair could hear everything inside and intercept anyone at the stairs without appearing to guard the room. A person at the side table could set down tea medication notes. A person standing in the doorway could block line of sight with one shift of the body and make it look like ordinary movement. Checkpoint. The word returned harder now because I had earned it. I sat in the hall chair. The wood arms were smooth from age. The cushion Marianne had tied onto the seat during hospice floral, drawn from the linen closet, ugly as a waiting room, compressed under my weight and released with a little sigh. From this spot I could hear the refrigerator motor start downstairs if the house was otherwise quiet. I could hear the front hall clock if I listened. I could also hear with terrifying clarity how a voice from inside the room might be blurred just enough by the angle of the doorway and the turn of the staircase that one could always claim uncertainty. I stood again, went into Evelyn's room and looked back out. From the bed, the landing chair was visible only if the door was wider than halfway. If the door rested on that familiar 6-inch opening, you would see mostly the frame, the hall light beyond, perhaps a passing shape. A patient lying weak in that bed looking toward the door could know people were near and still not know exactly who had answered and who had not. The room smelled faintly of lavender drawer sachets and old radiator heat. Evelyn's navy scarf still lay over the chair arm by the window. Her reading glasses remained on the bedside table beside the lamp and the little porcelain dish. On the dresser, her silver-backed brush caught light and threw it weakly back. The room had not become haunted in any supernatural sense. It had become procedural. Every object now seemed to ask what was its role in the system. I went to the bedside table and opened the drawer. tissues, 2 lip balms, a packet of mints long gone sticky with age, a small yellow legal pad with 3 pages torn out. Beneath that folded once a typed sheet headed Family Communication Notes in bold black letters. My stomach went cold. The paper was ordinary white printer stock, the kind Marianne used for everything from vacation schedules to grocery lists. At the top right corner in her tidy hand, she had written updated January 30th. Below that, bullet points, concise and managerial. Please check with Marianne for medication questions. Tom becomes distressed if too much is discussed at once. Best to keep environment low stim and visits brief after 5 p.m. If Evelyn asks repeated questions, reassure gently and redirect. Avoid crowding the room. I read the lines once then again. Tom becomes distressed if too much is discussed at once. I had the absurd urge to look around and see whether someone else in the room might object on my behalf. There is a particular cruelty in seeing yourself translated into policy. The paper shook slightly in my hand. Not because I am feeble, because rage, if you are not practiced in it, comes out through the fingers first. I carried the sheet downstairs to the dining room, laid it beside the notes, and underlined January 30th twice on my pad. Then I looked at the clock. 10 o'clock. I called hospice and asked for Meredith Sloan. The receptionist put me through after 1 hold and 2 cheerful transfers. Meredith's voice, when it came on, was pleasant and professional in a way that made me dislike her before she said anything useful. Too smooth, too institutionally calm. Then I reminded myself that I had once mistaken smoothness for safety, and perhaps the lesson of the week was not to make that error in either direction. "Mr. Hale," she said after I explained who I was. "I'm very sorry for your loss." "Yes, how can I help you?" I told her I had questions about communication during Evelyn's last weeks at home. I chose my words carefully, not because I feared her, because I had begun to understand that language was part of the battlefield, and I had already lost 1 campaign through carelessness. She listened without interruption. When I mentioned Dana Mercer's call, there was a very slight change in the tempo of her breathing, nothing more. "I see," she said. "Well, I can't discuss every detail of charting over the phone without reviewing the case, but I can tell you general procedure. If a patient requests a spouse, staff should make reasonable effort to facilitate that, unless there is a documented clinical reason not to. Family preference does not override patient access in the ordinary course of care." Ordinary course. General procedure. It was all so polished, it might have slid right off me if not for the sentence in the center of it. Family preference does not override patient access. Was there a documented clinical reason in my wife's case, I asked. Another measured pause. "I would need to review that. I have the notes. All of them. Enough. And they indicate your daughter was serving as a point person. They indicate a good many things. I understand your concern, Mr. Hale." "No," I said before I could stop myself. "I don't think you do." Silence. Then softer. "What exactly are you asking me?" There it was. The moment when one could either remain a grieving widower with concerns or become something more inconvenient. "I'm asking whether anyone at hospice flagged that my daughter had typed a communication directive stating I became distressed and should receive updates downstairs, because I never authorized that, and if my wife asked for me while I was in the house, I want to know who permitted her request to be managed as a scheduling matter." The sentence landed hard enough that I heard the refrigerator hum in the pause that followed. When Meredith spoke again, the warmth had thinned from her voice, but the professionalism had not. It had become more exact, better, realer. "I would like to review the case notes before answering in detail," she said. "But if what you're describing is accurate, that would not reflect best practice." Best practice. Not yet wrongdoing. But enough. "Will you review them?" "Yes." "When today?" And then I'll call you back." "Before the end of the day?" "Yes." I thanked her and hung up. Not because I felt grateful, but because my mother raised me properly, and some habits survive even when trust does not. At 10:42, Ruth Ann came through the back door without knocking, carrying a Pyrex dish with a towel tucked around it. "You look awful," she said. "I feel worse." She set the dish on the counter, saw the papers on the dining room table, and stopped in the doorway. "Oh," she said. "There are people who, upon entering a room full of documents, ask what all this is, as if surprise might preserve them from implication. Ruth Ann was not one of those people. She came in, looked once at the visitor log, once at my face, and said, 'How bad?' 'Bad enough that I need you to tell me something plainly if I ask.' Her expression changed. Not alarm exactly. Readiness. 'All right.' I gestured to the chair across from mine. She sat, purse on her lap, hands folded over it. 'You were here a lot in January.' 'Yes.' 'Did you ever hear Evelyn ask for me?' The question hit her visibly. Her shoulders gave a small start, and her thumb pressed into the seam of the purse strap exactly as I had seen her do in church committee meetings before saying the thing everyone else was hoping to avoid. 'Tom,' she said slowly, 'what did that nurse tell you?' 'What I asked you.' She looked down at the table. The visitor log was open to February 7th. Marianne's typed sheet lay beside it. Sun from the side window lit the fine lines in Ruth Ann's hands. 'I need the truth,' I said. She nodded once, still not looking at me. 'There was a day,' she said. 'Late January. Cold enough the back steps had that blue glaze on them by noon.' She lifted her eyes. 'I brought chicken and rice casserole. Marianne was in the kitchen. Luke was carrying linens upstairs. My mouth went dry. She said your wife was resting.' Ruth Ann swallowed. I heard a voice from upstairs. 'Evelyn's, yes.' What did she say? I couldn't make out all of it. Ruth Ann's voice had gone rough. 'Just your name. Clear as day.' 'Tom.' Then something after it. The room shifted. And what happened? Nothing at first. I looked at Marianne. She didn't look up, just kept spooning casserole into a dish like she hadn't heard a thing. Ruth Ann drew in a breath through her nose. I said, 'Sounded like Evelyn.' And Marianne said Ruth Ann closed her eyes for half a beat and opened them again. She said, 'She gets turned around in the evenings. Best not to answer every call or she'll exhaust herself.' I stared at her. 'And you believed her?' It was not accusation, not entirely, but I heard how it sounded. Ruth Ann flinched anyway. I believed she knew the system in that house better than I did. I believed your wife was on medication and confused sometimes. I believed a daughter handling things in her mother's dying room might know more than a neighbor with a casserole. Did you ask me no? Why? Her mouth tightened. Because you were at this table with your hands around a mug staring at nothing. And I thought, if there was something you needed to know, someone in your own family would tell you before the woman from next door did. That was the sort of sentence that could make a smaller man cruel. I was too busy recognizing its truth to manage cruelty. 'I'm sorry,' she said. 'I should have told you.' 'Yes,' I said. 'You should have.' Tears rose in her eyes, and because she was Ruth Ann, she blinked them back with visible annoyance. 'All right,' she said. 'I deserved that.' I looked at her, then at the casserole still steaming under its towel in the kitchen, then back at the papers. 'I'm not angry at you first,' I said. 'No,' she said. 'But you're not angry either.' That almost earned a smile and did not. The back door opened at 11:03 without knocking. Daniel's tread in the budroom was heavier than Marianne's, less precise, more willing to trust the floor. He came in, rolling his sleeves once at the wrist saw. Ruth Ann saw the table, saw my face, and said, 'Tell me.' So I did. Not all at once, not gracefully, but fully. Donna at church, the nurse's assumption, the visitor log, the notes, Marianne's typed communication sheet, Donna's call the night before. Meredith Sloane's statement about patient access. Ruth Ann hearing Evelyn call my name from upstairs while Mary Ann kept spooning casserole. Daniel listened, standing up at first, then sat down across from me and pulled a legal pad from his coat pocket like a man preparing for weather. He did not interrupt until the end. Then he said, "Show me the note about February 3rd. I handed it to him. He read. Then he read the January 30th communication sheet. Then the visitor log. His jaw tightened once and stayed that way. I knew she was overmanaging, he said. The sentence landed hard because it meant he had known enough to have a word for it before I did. How much did you know I didn't know this? He tapped the page. I didn't know anyone was formalizing it. I thought Mary Ann was being Mary Ann. That explains almost nothing. No. He looked at me. It explains why I let myself stay outside it, which is not the same thing. Ruth Ann sat very still. The dining room had taken on the feel of a hearing in a courthouse no one wanted to admit existed in a private house. Daniel said, "We need chronology. I have chronology. We need more than dates, Dad. We need sequence against memory. Who was here when? What was said? What you remember being told? What Ruth Ann heard? What Dana can document? What hospice confirms? We need the pattern, not just the offense." There it was again, that strange steadiness I was beginning to feel whenever paper met purpose. Grief still sat in the room with us, but it no longer occupied all available chairs. Daniel and I worked until nearly 1. Ruth Ann stayed. Between the three of us, we rebuilt as much of January and February as memory, weather, and casserole chronology allowed. Snowfall on the 22nd. Daniel here the Sunday after. Luke stopping by after work certain evenings because his auto shop let him off early on Thursdays. Mary Ann staying overnight when Evelyn's pain spiked. Ruth Ann bringing stew the night of the ice warning. Dana's regular visits. Chaplain, social worker. Times Evelyn's room light was left low. Times Mary Ann insisted the front door stay locked because too much traffic upsets her. It was astonishing how quickly domestic life becomes evidence once someone decides to stop calling it atmosphere. At 1:30, Ruth Ann left for a dentist appointment she had forgotten until her phone chirped at her purse. She touched my shoulder on the way out. Not tenderly, just once, like a person steadying a ladder before someone climbs. After she was gone, Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked toward the stairs. "Where's Luke today?" I checked the calendar by the fridge. Tuesdays he usually worked until 4, unless the shop was slow. "You're thinking of him." "I'm thinking Mary Ann doesn't act alone. She may not need to." "No," Daniel said quietly. "But someone carried trays. Someone answered doors. Someone stood on that landing with her. Someone was trained to call management care." The sentence made the dining room feel suddenly colder. Luke had always been easy to underestimate. 24, broad-faced, soft-spoken, capable, with his hands in the way boys who grow into auto shops often are. He had none of Mary Ann's verbal polish and all of her reluctance to challenge a room unless the room was already losing. In childhood, he had been the sort of boy who apologized when other children stepped on his fingers by mistake. In adolescence, he turned that into the habit of smoothing rather than deciding. He was helpful, useful, the family word for boys who can be sent. When Evelyn was sick, Luke fetched things, drove to the pharmacy, lifted boxes, carried linens, took out trash, brought broth upstairs, moved the rented equipment when the delivery men came. I had thought of him, if I am honest, as furniture with shoulders. Present, benign, not morally central. Now I saw the stupidity of that. "Can you get him here?" Daniel asked. "Not without Mary Ann hearing by supper." Good. I looked at him. He had Evelyn's mouth, as I said, but when he was concentrating, he acquired something of her stillness, too, a stillness people often misread as passivity until they found themselves somehow already answering the question he had not yet raised. "You want Mary Ann to hear? I want her to hear too late." He tapped the legal pad. "Call Luke directly. Tell him you need help moving something in the mudroom. Say not to mention it to his mother because you don't want her fussing. He'll come. I'm not going to trap my grandson in some performance. Daniel met my eyes and held them. Dad, he said, you're already inside the performance. We're trying to get out. That sat with me. I looked toward the mudroom door, the hall, the stairs beyond. The house did not merely contain the betrayal now. It had instructed it. Every threshold carried memory with new weights attached. All right, I said. I called Luke at 2:07. He answered on the third ring over the sound of what might have been an air compressor or impact wrench. Hey, Grandpa? Luke, you okay? Need a hand later? With what I want to move a cedar chest from the upstairs hall closet down into the front room. Today. Yes. A pause. Then, sure. I get off around 3:30. Come straight here. All right. And Luke? Yeah, don't mention it to your mother. She'll tell me to wait for Daniel to do it Sunday, and I don't want to wait. A little laugh, relieved at the familiarity of motherly obstruction. Okay. When I hung up, Daniel did not look pleased. He looked ready. At 2:40, Meredith Sloan called back. This time she sounded less polished and more like a woman in an office with a file open in front of her, and no good path through it. Mr. Hale, it's Tom. Yes. Tom. Paper moved softly at her end. I reviewed the case notes and spoke with Dana Mercer. And there are multiple entries indicating communication with family through your daughter. There is no formal restriction on your access documented in the chart. I waited. That means she continued that staff should not have treated your presence as discretionary if your wife requested you. The rage that had been pacing its kennel all day lifted its head. Should not have, I repeated? Yes. Did anyone at hospice challenge that while my wife was alive? A longer silence. There is one internal note, Meredith said at last, flagging concern that family communication had become too centralized through your daughter and recommending direct confirmation with patient and spouse when possible. I cannot tell from the record that follow-through occurred consistently. Why not? I don't know. I closed my eyes. Not because I wished to escape the room, but because hearing institutional failure in full daylight has its own smell, and I did not care for it. Did my wife ever tell staff she wanted me? I asked. Paper again. Meredith's voice lowered. Yes. My hand tightened around the phone. How many times I can verify 2 explicit references in nursing and social work notes to your wife, asking whether you were coming or asking for you directly. There may have been others reflected more obliquely. The room went soundless. 2 explicit references. Not memory now, not Dana's burdened conscience alone. Notes. Plural. Meredith said I need to say plainly that what appears to have happened does not reflect how we aim to practice. I am very sorry. Sorry again. The word had become almost architectural in the house, a polite brace installed after collapse. What exactly appears to have happened? I asked. There are moments when professionals choose whether to stay institutional or become moral beings for half a sentence. I heard Meredith make that choice in real time. It appears, she said carefully, that your daughter was treated by staff as the controlling family point of contact, and that your wife's requests for you were at least on some occasions managed through that filter rather than honored directly. Managed through that filter. It was the most accurate sentence I had heard all week. I hated it for that. I'd like a copy of those notes, I said. I can tell you the procedure for requesting records. Do that. She did. Release forms, timelines, compliance office privacy. Language. I wrote it all down while Daniel watched me and said nothing. When the call ended, I read the notes back to him. He stood very still by the sideboard, one hand on the back of a dining chair. That's enough, he said. Enough for what? To stop treating this like confusion. I looked at the papers, at the typed communication sheet, at the visitor log open to January, at Ruth Ann's empty chair, At the sideboard where Evelyn's mother's sampler still read, "Bless this house" in faded red thread. Bless this house. I almost tore it off the wall. Instead, I rose and went into the kitchen because I suddenly could not bear the dining room's order. The kitchen felt smaller now, as if every conversation that had occurred there during the winter had not dissipated with steam and supper, but remained trapped in the wallpaper. I stood at the counter where Marianne had stood cutting toast, stirring tea, speaking in lowered tones, while deciding what moved upstairs and what came back down. Dad Daniel said from the doorway. I did not turn. "There's more," I said. "What?" "The kitchen." He waited. "This is where it happened," I said. "Not all of it, but enough." He looked around the room. Then the way I had begun to look around it the day before, not as a son in his childhood home, but as a man measuring space for function. The stove, the sink, the counter where the kettle stood, the route from mudroom to stairs, the table where I sat, the distance to the bottom step. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I think you're right." At 3:37, Luke came through the mudroom with the smell of cold air and engine grease trailing him in. He had on his work jacket dark blue with the auto shop logo over the chest, and his truck keys clipped to his belt loop. They jingled once as he shut the door, then stopped. "Hey," he said. "Where's the chest?" His voice was ordinary. That almost fooled me. Ordinary is the sound betrayal uses when it still assumes its audience. "In a minute," I said. He looked from me to Daniel, standing near the stove, then to the dining room visible through the opening with papers spread across the table like a second meal no one had asked to eat. Something in his face tightened. "What's going on?" "Sit down," Daniel said. Luke did not. "Why?" "Because your grandfather asked you to." That still worked at least. Luke came into the dining room and sat in the chair Ruth Ann had occupied earlier. His hands went to his knees. The keys at his belt clicked softly against the wood as he shifted. He saw the visitor log, then. "What's that?" I was getting very tired of the question. "The sign-in book from upstairs," I said. His eyes flicked to mine, then away. "I forgot about that. I'm sure." He rubbed his jaw with the heel of one hand. "Look, if this is about Mom and Grandma's care stuff, I really don't know much. I just helped when I was here." There it was already, the minimized role prepared in advance. I felt not surprise, but a terrible settling of things into place. "Luke," I said, "did your grandmother ever ask you to get me?" He blinked. "What? Did your grandmother ever ask you to get me?" "No. I mean, not that I remember." Daniel stepped closer to the table. "You need to think harder than that," he said. Luke looked at him. "I am. Try again." I said, "I don't remember." His right hand had gone to the ring on his finger, now turning it around and around. I watched the movement. Evelyn used to say hands tell the truth 10 seconds before mouths do. I opened the visitor log to February the 3rd and slid it toward him. "You were upstairs at 4 to 12, I said. "Donna was there at 4 o'clock. Marianne was noted at bedside. The hospice notes from that day say my wife asked whether I was coming. You were in and out of that room. Did she ask you to get me?" Luke stared at the page as if he might find a trap door in the ruled lines. "Grandpa, I don't know exact dates. I didn't ask about dates," Daniel said very quietly. "Answer him." Luke's knee began to jump under the table. "I brought stuff up," he said. "Water, laundry, sometimes soup, yes. And Grandma. She talked sometimes. She was tired. It was hard to always tell. Did she ask for me?" He looked up, then directly at me, and for 1 second I saw the boy he had been at 11, standing in our driveway with a split lip after another child hit him with a baseball, stunned less by pain than by the fact that the world had not behaved politely. "No," he said. I knew it was a lie. Not because I am a human lie detector. because his face made the same small flinch Marianne's had made when knowledge arrived before language had dressed it. I rose. The chair scraped back. Luke startled visibly. Daniel did not move. "Come upstairs," I said. Luke's mouth opened. "Why?" "Because I want you to stand where you stood." I didn't. "Upstairs?" My own voice surprised me. Not loud, hard. Daniel stepped aside. Luke looked at him, perhaps hoping for softening, and found none. He stood. We went up single file. I led. Luke followed. Daniel came last. At the landing, I stopped beside the hall chair. "Where did you stand with the tray?" I asked. Luke swallowed. "What tray?" "The tray you brought up with broth. Toast tea water." "Pick one." His keys gave a tiny metallic tremor against his thigh. "I don't know." I pointed to the side table. "Did you set it there?" He looked. "Sometimes." "Sit." He hesitated. "Sit," I said again. He sat in the hall chair. The cushion sighed under him exactly as it had under me that morning. I had a sudden savage image of him here in January. Broad shoulders blocking the doorway while Marianne spoke over his shoulder, and my wife lay inside the room measuring distance by voices. "What could you hear from there?" I asked. Luke looked at the front room door. "Everything, I guess. Could you hear her call?" He said nothing. Daniel moved to the top of the stairs and leaned one shoulder against the wall, not blocking exit entirely, but enough that the landing no longer felt loose. He said, "Luke." Luke rubbed his palms on his work pants. "This isn't fair." The sentence almost stopped me because it was so childlike in its purity. Not false, just years too late. "No," I said. "It isn't." I opened the bedroom door wider. The room let in its dry, lavendered air. Light from the window reached the landing in a pale strip. "If you were sitting there," I said, "and she asked for me, what did you do?" Luke's face had gone the dull color people get when shame and fear arrive together, and neither one will leave first. He looked at the room, at the hall floor, at me, then away. "Mom said not to rile her up," he whispered. There it was. Not the whole thing, not yet, but enough to change the temperature of the house. I stepped closer. "What did your grandmother say?" He shook his head, once small and miserable. "Luke, she'd ask if you were coming." His voice cracked on the last word, then flattened again with effort. "Or if you'd been up, stuff like that." "Did you answer her?" "Sometimes I'd say you were downstairs." "Did she ask you to get me silence?" Daniel spoke, still quiet. "Answer him." Luke's hand went to his ring again, twisted, stopped. "I don't remember every time. Not every time I said." "One time. Tell me one time." He looked at me then, with the hunted, cornered look of a young man discovering that politeness does not survive chronology. "One night," he said, "I had a tray. The room held its breath. She asked if you were downstairs. I said yeah." He swallowed hard. "She asked if I'd get you. I did not feel my feet on the floor," and Luke's eyes shone. He wiped at one with the heel of his hand, angry at himself for the weakness and unable to stop it. "Mom said she'd just settled," he whispered. "She said if we kept running for you every time Grandma got worked up, it only made things worse." My voice, when it came, sounded like someone else's. Older. Stranger. "So what did you do?" Luke stared at the floorboards between his boots. I took the tray back downstairs. The house did not shudder. The walls did not close in. Nothing theatrical occurred. That was the worst part. The landing remained exactly what it had always been, paint runner, chair, side table, air. And yet, from that moment on, it ceased to be a place in my home and became a structure in the case. I think Daniel said my name. I am not sure, because all I could hear filling the space where breath should have been was the terrible plainness of what Luke had just confessed. a tray in his hands. My wife in that room, my name on her mouth, and his body turning away from the door to carry soup back downstairs instead of me. There are revelations so large they arrive without drama. They arrive like the floor giving way under a rug you have been admiring for years. I looked at the chair, at the side table, at the 6 inches of door that had been left between my wife and the hall. Then back at my grandson sitting in the checkpoint chair, young enough to be pitied and old enough to have done it anyway. What did she say exactly? I asked. Luke's eyes lifted a fraction. What? Her words. The ones before you turned around. He shook his head. I don't know. You do. No, you do. His mouth trembled. I had never in my life pressed a crying person for precision. In that moment, I understood why lawyers do. Luke drew in a ragged breath. She said, he stopped, swallowed, started again. She said, your grandfather thinks you're bringing him to me. The sentence entered me and stayed. Not because it was poetic, because it was precise, because inside it was my wife's full understanding of the arrangement. She knew what Luke had been made into. She knew what I believed downstairs. She knew in one clear, exhausted line that the system depended on my trust in a boy carrying a tray. I put a hand on the door frame because the hall moved once slightly and I wanted to stay standing through it. Daniel came off the wall then and crossed to the side table, not touching me, not touching Luke, simply putting one solid body in the middle of the landing as if to mark the place where soft language would no longer be allowed to roam. Luke looked from him to me, breathing hard through his nose. I thought Mom knew best, he said. I thought Grandma got confused. I thought you were always down there and nobody was yelling, and I thought if it was really wrong, somebody would say so. The confession would have softened me once. Not because it was good enough, because it was human enough. That was another of my old failings. I mistook recognizably human weakness for moral exemption. Instead, I heard in it the truest indictment of the whole family system. Nobody was yelling. That had been our God. Not truth, not courage, not my wife's voice, the absence of yelling. I looked into Evelyn's room. Late afternoon light had shifted across the bedspread. Her scarf lay dark on the chair arm. The lamp on the bedside table remained off. The room seemed farther away than any room in my own house had ever seemed. Then I looked back at Luke. She asked for me, I said. He shut his eyes. Yes, no more softened language. No more, maybe not that he remembered not how dates work. Not how things blur under medication and pressure and family strain. Just that. She asked for me, and he knew it. For a moment, none of us moved. Luke sat in the chair on the landing with his hands hanging useless between his knees, his work jacket still on the shop logo dark against his chest, his face gone young in the worst possible way. Daniel stood by the side table where the visitor log had once rested, one hand flat on the polished wood, as if the table itself might otherwise slide out from under the truth. I remained by the bedroom door with my palm against the frame, looking from my grandson to the room where my wife had lain, and asked for me in a voice I had not heard because I had trusted other people to tell me when it mattered. The house did not rescue any of us from that silence. The baseboard heat hissed softly through the front room. A car passed on the street below. Somewhere downstairs, the refrigerator motor kicked on, ordinary, as breathing. I remember that clearly, because it struck me even then as obscene that a machine could continue doing its harmless work while a family finished breaking open around it. Luke looked at me and then away again. I'm sorry, he said. The words came out wrecked and small. Not enough, not useless, just irreparably late. I went into Evelyn's room and stood by the window for a moment with my back to both of them. The late light had gone pale and hard across the front yard. The sycamore branches over the street made a black lattice against the sky. On the chair beside the window, Evelyn's navy scarf lay where I had left it folded over one arm, quiet and exact. When I turned back, I had made up my mind. Daniel. I said, call Ruth Ann. He did not ask why. He took out his phone and stepped toward the stairs. I looked at Luke. "Call your mother." He flinched. "Grandpa. Call her." He swallowed hard. "What do I say?" The truth would be a start. His face tightened. "I mean it," I said. "You tell her I asked her to come to the house. Tonight. No delay, no editing, no softening. And if you warn her around the edges, if you try to give her room to prepare some version of this before she walks in my door, I will know it from the first sentence out of her mouth." That landed. He gave one small, miserable nod and reached for his phone with fingers that did not seem to belong to him. I left him there on the landing and went downstairs. The family room sat off the dining room at the back of the house, less formal than the sitting room out front, more used than either room had any right to be after 40 years of children, holidays, arguments, pneumonia, board games, television westerns, tax season, and ordinary Thursdays. It had a brick fireplace with a simple oak mantel Evelyn decorated with cedar at Christmas and tulips in spring. A long sofa faced 2 armchairs, and a low table worn pale at the edges where feet and coffee cups had found it over decades. On the far wall stood the built-in shelves Daniel and I had installed in 1997 when Marianne insisted all the books in the den made the room feel like a law office. The room had always belonged to evenings, to weather, to long married silence, broken by one person reading aloud from the paper while the other corrected the headline. That was where I decided it would begin. Not in the dining room with its papers, not in the kitchen where too much had already been translated, not on the landing where the truth would eventually have to stand, but where it should not begin, because I wanted Marianne to walk through this house under the full weight of what each room had meant and not yet know where I intended to break her version of it. I gathered the visitor log, the hospice notes, Marianne's typed communication sheet, my legal pad, and laid them out on the coffee table in the family room. Then I moved the armchairs slightly closer, not enough to look staged. Enough that no one could sit too far back from what was on the table. The house had entered that stage of evening when every room begins making its own kind of shadow. The kitchen lamp cast a warm square against the wall. The hall beyond the dining room dimmed sooner than the back rooms ever did. I turned on the standing lamp beside the sofa and left the overhead off. I wanted no brightness that would let anyone feel falsely clean. Daniel came in first from the mudroom. "Ruth Ann's coming." "And Luke?" "In the kitchen," he said. He reached Marianne. She said she'd be here by 6. I looked at the clock over the mantel. 5:08. We had time. I hated that. Daniel stood looking at me a moment. He had rolled his sleeves down again and buttoned the cuffs, a gesture so unlike him that I knew he had done it to hold himself together. He looked older than 44. Not old. Just suddenly aware of what middle-aged sons discover at bad family funerals and worse, family reckonings, that one day your father will ask you to stand beside him against the shape of the family itself, and you will either be a man or a spectator. "You don't have to do this tonight," he said. "Yes," I said, "I do. She can't explain this away by morning. That isn't what I mean." I looked at him. He drew one breath and let it out slowly. "Once you say it all out loud in this house, it doesn't go back into the walls." I almost answered that it was already in the walls. Instead, I said, "Good." At 5:24, Ruth Ann came through the back door, wearing her dark green coat and carrying no casserole, which told me more than any sentence could have. She set her purse down on the dining room chair nearest the opening to the family room and looked at the coffee table. "Well," she said quietly, "you're really doing it?" "Yes." She nodded once. "All right. No theatrics. No warnings against upsetting everyone. No talk about whether it might be better after Easter or on a Sunday afternoon or when tempers cooled." That was one of the reasons I had asked her to come. There are people who make truth easier by agreeing with you. Ruth Ann made it easier by refusing to behave as though truth itself were rude. Luke came in from the kitchen a minute later. He had washed his face. That was obvious. The skin around his eyes was blotchy and too clean. He did not ask where to sit. He stood near the entry to the family room like a repairman who had realized halfway through a job that the broken thing was the house itself. "Sit down," I said. He sat on the edge of the armchair nearest the fireplace. Daniel took the other. Ruth Ann sat at one end of the sofa. I remained standing until the last possible moment, not out of theater, but because sitting before Marianne arrived felt too much like waiting to be corrected in my own house. The sound of her car came at 5:58. We all heard it. Engine in the drive, car door, her shoes on the back path, the mudroom latch. A pause as if she had sensed before opening the kitchen door that the house on the other side had been arranged against her. Then she came in. She took in the kitchen first, of course, because that was her command post. No one there. Then the dining room. Then the family room beyond it. All of us gathered the papers on the coffee table, the light low and deliberate, Luke in the chair with his face not right. Her expression did not collapse. It sharpened. "What is this?" she asked. I gestured to the empty chair between Luke and the sofa. "Sit down." "No." "Then stand there and listen." She remained in the opening between the dining room and the family room, still on purse over one shoulder, every inch of her body arranged for refusal that would still look reasonable from the street. "Dad, if this is about whatever Luke called me about, I am not doing an ambush in my parents' house. Then stop ambushing dead women in mine." The sentence landed so hard, the room changed shape around it. Marianne stared at me. Daniel lowered his eyes briefly. Ruth Ann did not move. Luke made a small sound in his throat and swallowed it. When Marianne spoke again, her voice was very quiet. "That is a disgusting thing to say. I'll say cleaner things if I can," I said. "Sit down." For 1 second, I thought she might leave. A smarter woman might have, but Marianne's deepest weakness had never been temper. It was confidence in her ability to manage a room once she stood inside it. She stepped into the family room and sat setting her purse carefully at her feet as though dinner might still eventually be served. I remained standing. The coffee table between us held the visitor log at the center open, but not yet accusing, the typed sheet beside it, the hospice notes stacked in chronological order, my legal pad on top. No one spoke. At last, Marianne looked at Luke. "What did you say to him?" Luke did not answer. She turned to me. "If this is about records and people misremembering a horrible time, I suggest we all take a breath." "No," I said. "I am finished taking breaths before truth." That was the moment she understood I would not be steered. I saw it in her face. Not fear, not even yet. Just the first clean recognition that the soft handles she had always found on me had been removed. I sat down in the straight chair opposite her. "I am going to speak," I said. "You will not interrupt me until I am finished. After that you may say whatever you wish, but you will say it in front of these people and in front of the papers you helped create." That I lifted one hand. To my surprise, she stopped. "I was asked at church yesterday. I said why I never visited my wife upstairs before she died." Ruth Ann looked at Marianne. Daniel did not. I came home and found the visitor log on the landing side table. I found pages of entries from January and February, with staff clergy, Ruth Ann, Daniel Yu, Luke. Not me. I touched the leather cover with 2 fingers. Then I read the hospice notes. They say husband updated downstairs. They say spouse resting. They say family requests low stimulation. Then I found your communication sheet in Evelyn's bedside drawer, saying I became distressed if too much was discussed and that updates were best given downstairs. Marianne opened her mouth. I raised my hand again. I spoke with Dana Mercer. I spoke with Meredith Sloan. Both confirmed that if Evelyn asked for me, family preference did not override my access. Dana told me she was repeatedly informed I had already been upstairs, or that I preferred updates in the kitchen, or that another visit would upset your mother. I turned 1 page on the legal pad, though I did not need to. Meredith confirmed there are at least 2 explicit references in hospice notes to Evelyn asking whether I was coming or asking for me directly. Marianne's face had gone still in the way lakes do before weather. I continued. Ruth Ann has told us she stood in the kitchen one evening while you said Evelyn was sleeping and heard her call my name from upstairs. At that, Ruth Ann spoke because she understood plainness better than most clergy. I did, she said. And you told me not to answer because she was confused. Mary Ann's head turned toward her, slowly as if old friendship might still produce cover. Ruth Ann looked back without blinking. Then I said Luke has told us that Grandma asked him to get me, and instead he took the tray back downstairs because you told him not to rile her up. That was the first time Mary Ann's composure truly flickered. She looked at Luke, and I saw in one clear and terrible instant the whole old machinery of her household authority move to life behind her eyes. Correction, containment, reinterpretation. Rescue. She might as well have reached for a knife. She did not need one. Luke, she said, quiet as prayer. What exactly did you say? Luke shrank before my eyes. I leaned forward. No. He answers to the room, not to you. Mary Ann turned back to me. This is insane. No, this is late. She stood. That happened fast. The purse remained at her feet. The body moved without it. You are not going to sit there and let that boy's guilt and a nurse's selective memory become some accusation that I kept you from your wife, she said. Her voice was still low, but something private had entered it now, something stripped of patience. I held this family together while you walked around in a fog, with a coffee mug in your hand, pretending grief was a task list. I was the one who cleaned her. I was the one who changed the sheets when she bled through them. I was the one who made sure people weren't parading in and out of that room like it was a church social. If I made judgment calls, it was because someone had to. There it was, not ranting, not shouting, worse. The first contempt beneath the care. I rose too. You were not appointed the owner of my marriage because you could wash a body, I said. The sentence hit her hard enough that color rose in her face. I never said I owned anything. You acted like it. I acted like someone had to decide. Your mother did decide, when she was clear. The room went silent. I saw Daniel's head come up sharply. Ruth Ann's mouth tightened. Luke stared at the floor as if he hoped the rug might open and perform the courtesy his family would not. I stepped around the coffee table. Mary Ann did not back up. She held her ground because she had spent 47 years turning ground held into moral advantage. Let me say this once, plainly, I said. You do not get to decide after her death which parts of your mother count as clear enough to be respected. Her eyes widened, not from sadness, but from the fact that I had finally named the center of it. You have no idea what those days were like upstairs, she said. I know exactly what they were like now. They were managed. That is not the same as harmful. She asked for me. She was dying. So she lost the right. No one said that. You did. Every time you answered for her. She laughed once, then, short and disbelieving. This is what you're doing. Turning every practical decision into some moral crime because you can't bear that you weren't stronger at the time. The line might have broken me if it were not in its way. The truest thing she had said, because yes, I had not been stronger. I had not been the husband I ought to have been at the foot of that staircase. I had accepted too much translation, too much gentling, too much family weather, called mercy, but hearing my own failure spoken in her mouth did something unexpected. It did not shame me into retreat. It freed me from the last need to protect myself. I said very quietly I was weaker than I should have been, and you built a system around that weakness. Her face changed. Not because she was moved, because for the first time she understood that confession did not weaken the accusation. It gave it moral force. Daniel stood then. He did not come between us. He came beside me. That's right, he said. Mary Ann turned on him. Don't. What, do not stand there and do this self-righteous act with him. You were gone half the time. Yes, Daniel said. And I was wrong not to push sooner, but being absent some doesn't make what you did into care. What I did. He stepped to the coffee table, picked up Marianne's typed communication sheet and held it up between two fingers. You typed a policy for our father in his own house. It was a note for staff. It was a script, he said. You made him into a management problem and Mom into a room to be administered. Marianne's mouth flattened. Ruth Ann spoke next from the sofa, her voice dry and final. I watched you turn people away from those stairs with a smile on your face. Marianne turned to her as if betrayed by category itself. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have enough. You brought casseroles. I kept her alive. The sentence hung in the air too long after she said it. Even she seemed to hear it. Luke made a tiny, involuntary sound. Not quite a gasp, more like the body's refusal to keep hosting what the mouth just said. I looked at Marianne, really looked, and at last I could see the whole shape of it without my old pity for family friction getting in the way. She had not wanted money. She had not wanted the house. She had wanted necessity. She had wanted to be the one through whom comfort, information, timing, and permission moved. She had wanted her mother's final season to confirm the thing she had always feared it did not, that without her management the family would come apart. And once you want that badly enough, you begin confusing your centrality with goodness. You begin answering for the sick because they are slower than you. You begin translating the tired because they are tired. You begin rationing access because everyone else is messy and you are clean. You begin to believe that if you use a soft voice, the violence of deciding for other people no longer counts as violence. I said, you didn't keep her alive. You kept yourself necessary. That one struck home. All the warmth went out of her face. In its place came something I had only glimpsed before, usually in flashes so brief I had dismissed them as fatigue or old resentment, a private contempt for weakness, disorder, and emotional need. For dependence she could not respect unless she was controlling it. She would have died in chaos without me, Marianne said. Then she should have been allowed to die with her husband. Marianne shook her head once sharp and unbelieving. You are not helping her. No, I said. You made sure of that. Silence. The house held it. Then from the armchair by the fireplace, Luke spoke in a voice so strained it barely sounded like his. Mom. Everyone looked at him. He had gone pale. His hands were clasped so tightly between his knees, the knuckles were white. She did ask for Grandpa. Marianne turned. I have never forgotten the expression on her face then. Not rage, not grief. Calculation meeting public disobedience. The exact instant a long-practiced domestic authority discovers the smaller bodies it relied on have acquired souls at the wrong moment. Luke, she said low and controlled, you don't understand how those days worked. I do. He swallowed. I was there. You were a child. I was 24. You were overwhelmed. So was Grandpa. That landed harder than anything else had. Perhaps because Luke had never before in his adult life placed me and himself on the same moral line in opposition to his mother. He looked sick doing it, but he did not take it back. Marianne stared at him. Then she did something worse than shouting. She smiled, only a little, only enough to turn all the air in the family room into something poisonous. This is guilt talking, she said. He's upset and you're all feeding it because it gives you somewhere to put your own regrets. The room recoiled from her. That was the full mask collapse. Not a speech, not a confession. The smooth, intimate cruelty of a woman calmly attempting to invalidate her son's conscience while the dead woman's papers sat 3 feet away. I walked to the coffee table, picked up the visitor log, and held it in both hands. No, I said. This is not guilt talking. This is record. This is pattern. This is witness. This is the sound of your mother asking for me, while you and your son decided what level of me she was allowed. My voice had changed. I knew it because the room changed with it. Marianne took 1 step toward me. Put that down. There are moments in life when an ordinary object becomes not symbolic but active. A wedding ring, a house key, a folded discharge paper. The visitor log had begun as a book. By then it had become something else entirely. The piece of the world that had no feelings to protect, no family role to preserve, no grief to soften. A spine made of dates. I opened it. January 29th, I said. Husband updated downstairs. Turned a page. February 3rd, spouse resting, daughter at bedside. Another. February 7th, family requests low stimulation. I looked up at her. You wrote me out of my wife's death, one careful phrase at a time. She shook her head. That is not what happened. Then tell us what did. I did what was needed. For whom? She did not answer. That was its own answer. I closed the log and set it back on the table with more care than I had ever used setting down anger in my life. Then I said the thing I had not known until that moment I was going to say. You are going to leave this house tonight. You are going to return every key you have. You are not going upstairs again unless I ask you to. You are not going to tell one more person in this town the story of your mother's last weeks as though it belongs to you, to curate. Daniel and I will request the hospice records. We will notify church leadership because I will not have condolence language built on a lie. And when people ask what happened here, I will tell them plainly that your mother asked for me and was answered through you. For the first time, Marianne's face showed something like actual fear, not fear of police. There were no handcuffs in this room, no sirens, no theatrical justice. Fear of losing narrative control, fear of no longer being the translator of family reality. You would humiliate your own daughter publicly. No, I said. You have already done the humiliating. I am doing the naming. She looked at Daniel. You'll let him do this? Daniel's answer was immediate. Yes. She looked at Luke. He did not meet her eyes. She looked finally at Ruth Ann, perhaps from habit, perhaps from some old faith in community, women preserving domestic peace. Ruth Ann said, Hand over the key, Marianne. It was the cleanest sentence in the room. For a second, nothing moved. Then Marianne bent, picked up her purse, reached into the side pocket, and drew out the house key on its brass ring. She held it in her hand without giving it to me. When she spoke again, her voice had lost all softness. You think this makes you noble, she said. You think standing there with your papers and your belated conscience makes you the husband she deserved. It doesn't. It makes you a man who noticed too late and needs someone smaller than grief to punish. I listened to every word. Then I said, I know exactly what noticing too late makes me. That's why this doesn't end with punishment. It ends with truth. I held out my hand. After a moment, she placed the key in it. It was warm from her palm. She turned and walked out. No dramatic slam, just steps through the dining room, the kitchen, the mudroom, then the back door, then her car starting in the drive, then the sound of tires on gravel thinning into distance. No one spoke until the house had fully absorbed her absence. Then Luke began to cry. Not loudly, not theatrically, the ugly, stunned crying of a grown man who has spent years behaving as if obedience were neutrality and has just been informed by reality that it was not. I sat down because my knees had started to go uncertain under me. Luke bent forward over his clasped hands and cried into them. Daniel remained standing for a few seconds, jaw tight, then crouched in front of him and put a hand on the back of his neck the way he might steady a patient learning to trust his own legs again. I'm sorry, Luke said. I'm sorry, Grandpa. I'm sorry. I looked at him. A strange thing happens after justice begins. You do not feel better. You feel cleaner and more tired at once. I believe you're sorry, I said. That doesn't make you innocent. He nodded against his hands. That too was something. Ruth Ann stood. I'm going to make coffee before anyone tries to faint from righteousness. It was such a Ruth Ann sentence that Daniel almost laughed and did not. She went into the kitchen, and a minute later, the sound of the kettle began small and domestic and miraculous in its refusal to honor tragedy with silence forever. Daniel stayed with Luke a while. I remained in the chair opposite the coffee table staring at the visitor log. The lamp beside the sofa had come on stronger as the sky went down. Its light touched the leather cover and made the edges glow a little. In the dining room beyond the legal pad lay open with my handwriting on it, names and dates running down the page like a second family tree. At some point, Luke got up and washed his face again. When he came back into the family room, he stood in front of me with his shoulders bowed. "I don't know what to do now," he said. It was the first truly adult sentence I had ever heard him say. "Start by not lying again," I said. He nodded. Then I said, "When hospice requests clarification, you tell the truth. When your mother tells you this was all blown up by grief, you tell the truth. And when you remember your grandmother asking for me, for the rest of your life, you do not turn that memory into a story about how hard it was for you. You remember what it cost her." His face crumpled a little at that, but he nodded again. Daniel drove him home an hour later because I did not want Luke getting behind a wheel in that state, and because Daniel, for all his anger, still understood the difference between accountability and abandoning a young man to shame. Ruth Ann stayed until nearly 9. We drank coffee none of us needed. We talked through practical things, record requests, what to say if Mary Ann called before morning, whether church leadership truly needed to be informed, or whether that might turn private failure into gossip. On that point, Ruth Ann surprised me by siding not with exposure, but with dignity. "Tell who needs telling," she said. "Not everybody who enjoys the taste of it." That was right. When she left, she stood in the mudroom with one hand on the doorknob and looked back at me. "You all right to be alone in here tonight?" "No," I said. She nodded. "Good. Means you're in the right house." After she was gone, the silence returned, but it was not the same silence. The house had changed sides. It still contained the landing, the kitchen counter, the side table, the chair. It still held every evening when I sat downstairs too obediently, inside my own helplessness. It still held the fact that my wife had asked for me, and I had not come because I had trusted the wrong arrangements. Nothing in the structure was repaired by Mary Ann's leaving, but the silence had lost its deceit. I turned off lights, room by room, the way Evelyn always had, not out of thrift exactly, but because she believed dark should enter a house in an orderly manner. Kitchen lamp, dining room chandelier left off, hall sconce. Family room lamp still on. Then I took the visitor log in both hands and went upstairs. The landing felt different at night, not haunted, reoccupied. I paused beside the hall chair and the side table looking at them in the low amber light from the front room lamp I had switched on before coming up. Ordinary furniture. That was the thing to remember. Evil in houses like ours rarely announces itself through grotesque objects or locked doors. It uses straight-backed chairs, polished side tables, towels, trays lowered, voices useful, sons, tired husbands. It borrows the shape of care and trusts everyone decent in the room to hesitate before calling it something else. I carried the log into Evelyn's room. The air was cooler there than downstairs. The radiator clicked softly under the front windows. Her scarf still lay on the chair arm, dark and familiar. The bed restored but not fully stood where the hospice bed had once been. The lamp cast its little circle over the table with her glasses and the porcelain dish. In the hall closet just beyond the landing stood the cedar chest. It had belonged to Evelyn's mother before it belonged to Evelyn, and before that to some aunt in Chillicothe. If family stories were to be trusted, though those were often less precise than we liked to admit. We kept winter blankets in it for years, then baby clothes, then Christmas linens. During hospice, it had been shifted into the hall closet because the room needed space for equipment. I had thought about moving it back a dozen times since February, and never had. I brought it into the room slowly, one end lifted against my shin, the way I used to move furniture when the children were small and money for movers was absurd. Once inside, I set it at the foot of the bed and lifted the lid. Cedar rose clean and dry, one of the saddest smells in the world, because it is made for keeping what must not mildew, not for keeping what you can never use again. Inside lay folded afghans, the old yellow quilt from Cedarville that Marianne had claimed was long donated, and a stack of linen guest towels, Evelyn embroidered with initials 20 years ago when she went through a brief but earnest phase of pretending we were formal people. I touched the quilt and had to smile once faintly because even now my wife was proving somebody wrong from inside storage. I laid the visitor log across the folded quilt. Then I took the hospice notes from under my arm and placed them beside it. For a minute I stood there looking down uncertain. The scarf. Of course. I went to the chair by the window and lifted Evelyn's navy scarf in both hands. It still held the faintest trace of her lavender soap, or perhaps memory supplied that because it was needed. Either way, I did not argue with the mercy. I folded the scarf once, then laid it gently over the visitor log, and the papers beneath, not hiding them, not burying them, joining them. The effect of it undid me, not dramatically. No collapse to the floor, no broken shouting into the room. Just a man in his 71st year standing at the foot of a bed in the house he had bought with a VA, loan and schoolteacher's savings, looking at the scarf of the woman who had loved him long enough to outgrow his blind spots before he did. And finally understanding that truth could still be an act of care after care itself had failed. I sat in the chair by the window. Outside Larkspur Avenue had gone quiet. A porch light glowed across the street. Somewhere down the block a dog barked once and was hushed. In the glass I could see my own reflection, faintly superimposed on the street beyond. Shoulders narrower than they used to be, hair white of face, worn thin by winter and revelation. Not a heroic face, not even a particularly strong one. Just a man who had come too late to some of the most important minutes of his marriage and had at last stopped lying about the cost. I thought then of Evelyn on the landing last winter, saying, "Being needed and being trusted are not the same thing, Tom." At the time I had kissed her cheek and made it into a gentle marital exchange because I preferred my wisdom folded into affection. Tonight I heard what she had really been offering me, not philosophy, not complaint, but a warning in the language she knew I would least resist. I had resisted it anyway. There would be no neat ending to that. No private ritual in this room could make back the lost evenings. No key reclaimed, no daughter removed, no records corrected, no witness aligned could restore the exact shape of my wife's face when she realized the boy with the tray was not bringing me to her after all. That remained unrecoverable. Justice, if that is the word, had not repaired the house. It had only returned ownership of the injury to the truth. After a long time, I stood cross to the door and looked back. The room was simple again. Bed, chair, lamp, cedar chest at the foot of the bed with the lid still open and the scarf resting over the visitor log. Not a shrine, not a crime scene, not any longer the administered room of winter. Just the place where a woman had died and where her husband, late but finally honest, had placed the record of what happened beside the things that were still tender enough to survive it. I reached for the doorknob, then I stopped. For 4 months after the funeral, I had left this door mostly closed, not shut hard, just nearly, enough to keep the room from spilling into the hall. Enough to tell myself grief required boundaries and not notice that I was repeating one more version of the arrangement that had harmed us. I let go of the knob. The door remained open. I turned off the lamp, left the hall light on, and walked slowly to the stairs. At the landing, I paused by the chair and side table. Tomorrow I would move them. Not tonight. Tonight they could remain where they were, not as guardians of a lie, but as stripped evidence of one. Let them sit in the hall one last night and mean exactly what they had meant. Then I went downstairs. The family room still held the shape of the confrontation, but softer now. Cups on coasters, one cushion indented where Ruth Ann had sat, my legal pad closed. Marianne's absence no longer felt like command, but vacancy. In the kitchen, the dish towel hung straight over the oven handle, The clock over the pantry door was still 6 minutes fast. The blue mug sat upside down by the sink drying. I stood there in the low house noise of late evening and understood something I wish I had understood before my hair turned white. Love does not fail because people die. It fails when it fails because somebody lets comfort speak louder than truth. Evelyn had not done that. Not really. Even her warnings had been acts of restraint in service of dignity. I had done it, and Marianne had used it, and Luke had learned it, and hospice had bowed to it because orderly families make everyone lazy. But tonight, truth had spoken louder in the end. Not soon enough to save her, soon enough to leave the door open. Before bed, I went back once more to the foot of the stairs and looked up. The hall light cast a warm path to the landing. Beyond it, the front room stood dim and open, not hidden, not guarded, not translated. Just there. For the first time since winter, I did not feel shut out of my own house. I turned off the downstairs lamp, left the landing light burning, and stood a moment longer, listening to the old place settle around me. Not innocent anymore, not clean, but mine again, and hers. In the right way at last. Then I went to bed with the upstairs door still open and the truth resting beneath Evelyn's scarf in the cedar chest where it would remain not as a weapon but as part of the family record no one would ever again be allowed to rewrite.